ki jai. Nantikoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Janita Gaur Premanandi. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, chapter entitled Jit Age Parivrajikacharya. So this is May 12th, 1971. In his quarters in Sydney, Prabhupada wrote the preface to the upcoming edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is. The Macmillan Company had now agreed to print the unabridged manuscript. The contract was signed, the book was being readied for printing, only the preface remained to be written. Prabhupada wrote in his preface that although he was known for starting the Krishna consciousness movement in America, actually, quote, the original father of this movement is Lord Krishna himself, end quote. Giving all credit for his own achievements to his spiritual master, Prabhupada said that the only qualification he himself had was that he had tried to present Bhagavad Gita as it is without adulteration. And this is, I think, from the preface. Instead of satisfying his own personal material senses, he, a person, has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of life. The Lord wants this and he demands it. One has to understand the central point of Bhagavad Gita. Our Krishna consciousness movement is teaching the whole world this central point. And because we are not polluting the theme of Bhagavad Gita as it is, anyone seriously interested in deriving benefit by studying the Bhagavad Gita must take help from the Krishna consciousness movement for practical understanding of Bhagavad Gita under the direct guidance of the Lord. We hope, therefore, that people will derive the greatest benefit by studying Bhagavad Gita as it is, as we have presented it here. And if even one man becomes a pure devotee of the Lord, we shall consider our attempt a success. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 14. Today we're doing text number 25. Just waiting for my device to turn on. It's almost there. Here we go. Text 25. Qua chich cha shita vatad yaneka di daivika botikat miyanang dashanang pratini varane kalpo duranta chintaya vishana aste. Word for word. Quachit, sometimes. Cha, also. Shita vata adi, such as cold and strong wind. Aneka, various. Adi daivika, created by the demigods. Bautika, adi bautika, created by other living beings. Atmiyanam, adhyatmika, created by the body and mind. Dashanam, of conditions of misery. Pratinivarane, in the counteracting. Akalpa, unable. Duranta, very severe. Chintaya, by anxieties. Vishana, morose. Aste, he remains. Translation. Being unable to protect himself from the threefold miseries of material existence, the conditioned soul becomes very morose and lives a life of lamentation. These threefold miseries are miseries suffered by mental calamity at the hands of the demigods, such as freezing wind and scorching heat, miseries offered by other living entities, and miseries arising from the mind and body themselves. Purport. The so-called happy materialistic person is constantly having to endure the threefold miseries of life, called Adidaivika, Adhyatmika, and Adibautika. Actually, no one can counteract these threefold miseries. All three may assail one at one time, or one misery may be absent and the other present. Thus, the living entity is full of anxiety, fearing misery from one side or the other. The conditioned soul must be disturbed by at least one of these three miseries. There is no escape. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again. Being unable to protect himself from the threefold miseries of material existence, the conditioned soul becomes very morose and lives a life of lamentation. These threefold miseries are miseries suffered by mental calamity at the hands of the demigods, such as freezing wind and scorching heat, miseries offered by other living entities, and miseries arising from the mind and body themselves. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Sounds very depressing, doesn't it? Especially the last sentences of the paragraph there. The conditioned soul must be disturbed by at least one of these three miseries. There is no escape. So if it's that depressing, why do we continue reading Srimad Bhagavatam? So fortunately, this isn't the only text and purport in the whole canto. There are many encouraging texts and purports. But this is actually encouraging, as it said in Sanatana Goswami's prayers to the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says that actually every syllable of Srimad Bhagavatam is flooded with Krishna praying. So these statements that this world sucks and it's full of misery, those statements are full of Krishna praying, because they're trying to awaken us to reality that the higher taste is out there. And yes, you can try to find some happiness here, and yes, there's some so-called happiness, but it's not the real thing. So by pointing out what is inferior, it's an act of mercy. It's an act of encouragement, because if you want something to experience something superior, then first they have to let go of what they're currently doing. Just like the examples given, if you want to give someone a pizza, first you have to tell them to let go of that sandwich they're holding in the hand. The pizza is tastier than the sandwich, but they're not going to get to experience it if they won't let go of the sandwich that they're holding. So just going through the purports, we can't protect ourselves from the miseries. Okay, so we know, we've heard this all before. The only solution is Krishna consciousness. Basically, no matter what you do in this material world, even if you have the nicest house, you've got a really good exercise regime, you've got a really good diet, you've got a nice family, you've got good friends, good relationships, your car doesn't break down, you get to work on time, your boss is nice to you, you actually work with nice people somehow or other, you live in a city that's not polluted, your house is in a nice, scenic environment, birds chirp in the morning, no one wakes you up untimely, there's no traffic on the way to work, basically your life's perfect. But unfortunately, you get old, you get diseased, and you die. I'm sorry. So that's the thing. You can't win in this material world. Even if everything materially is perfect, you will still get old, you'll still get disease, and you will still die. So, what to do? So, what I just described there is obviously unrealistic and will never ever happen. But just say, for argument's sake, it did, still, there are the miseries there. So if we're getting more realistic, then of course other people are going to agitate you. You're going to go to work and your boss is going to get on your case. One of your colleagues is going to get envious of you and going to try to take your job or point out all your faults and get you in trouble. Your own mind will start disturbing you. It'll start getting anxious and nervous about something that's not even a problem. And then it will manifest into a problem, even though it was never a problem. And then you think something about someone that's not true. And then because of that, you do something silly. And then they see you doing that silly thing and they think the wrong thing about you. And then the whole drama manifests all because your own mind just manufactured some story. So, and then on top of that, the Adidaivika miseries, on the way to work, it's a thunderstorm and you end up like, driving through a pothole. Then you end up hitting the curb and you damage your tire. So then you have to get your tire replaced on your car because of the bad weather. And then when you get out of the car, of course, it's freezing cold and you're shivering. And then you get a cold and then your nose is runny. And then on top of that, it ends up raining so much, it ends up flooding. You get back to your house and there's partial flooding in your house. So, yeah, basically the miseries of the material world are there. So another thing I was thinking about is that just actually going through the Bhagavatam itself, practically every story is a misery. I was just thinking, just the first canto itself, how does it start? We have the sages at Naimisharanya, headed by Shaunaka Rishi, and they say to Sutta Goswami that we're trying to counteract the problems of Kali Yuga, because not just the body and mind, not just the weather, and not just living entities, but the whole of Kali Yuga itself is a disaster and a misery. So we're just trying to counteract that. That's how Bhagavatam starts off. This very time that we're in, these next 432,000 years, it's just a miserable time in general. So we're trying to counteract that. And what to speak of all the individual miseries. So that's how the Bhagavatam starts off. And then, very interestingly, what I was just describing before about how even if you had the perfect life, still there will be miseries because of birth, death, old age, and disease, the four essential miseries. I was just thinking how next in the Bhagavatam we hear about Vyasadeva, the incarnation of the Lord himself, Shaktivesh Avatar, empowered to write the Vedas, who's Trikalagya, who is in Samadhi practically. He's like no one that we've ever met before in our lives. He writes all the Vedas down. Like he has knowledge like no one else. He knows everything. And yet, even though he knows everything, and not only he knows everything, he shares everything he knows with others. He's being very generous and being a teacher. He is still miserable. So he knows the mode of goodness perfectly. And he teaches everyone else the mode of goodness perfectly. Yet still he is miserable. This is Vyasadeva. Because as Narada Muni came and said to him, basically that, I'm sorry, Sattva Gun's not enough. You haven't directly glorified Krishna. That's your problem. That's why you're miserable. So even, again, right again in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it's pointed out that you can't be satisfied on the platform of the mode of goodness. The incarnation of the Lord himself showing that by example, that he did it, he wrote everything down, he gave all knowledge in all areas, in all departments of how to live a perfect material life, but he wasn't satisfied. And Narada Muni says, are you happy identifying with the body and the mind? Like basically, are you happy trying to be happier in this material world? You have to have Krishna. You can't leave, as soon as you leave Krishna out, immediately you're going to have problems. And that's what it says in the 11th canto. I can't remember exactly how the shloka starts. Bayam, Dviti Biniveshita Syat. That fear arises as soon as one forgets Krishna. So again, like, you can have the perfect, completely perfect material situation, but if Krishna's not involved, you're going to be fearful. That's just that's the reality of life. So many other stories are there in the first canto. Narada Muni himself suffered intense misery. His mum died when he was only like 5 years old. That's a pretty intense misery. Arjuna, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is showing us so much misery. That's like the very foundation of the Bhagavad Gita, is that the misery of other living entities. Oh, all these people who are from my family and my friends and my relatives, they're trying to kill me. That's a pretty big misery. And then his own body and mind, he's like shivering, he's crying, he can't focus, he's lamenting, he can't decide what's the right or wrong thing to do. So his own body and mind are giving him so much grief. And then in the Bhagavatam, Arjuna gets more misery. Ashvatthama is throwing a Brahmastra at him, and then he's throwing a Brahmastra at all his brothers, and then he's throwing a Brahmastra at Parikshit Maharaj. That's a pretty intense misery. And then Queen Kunti teaches us really how we should see all these miseries. She says that actually all these miseries, they're not really the miseries. The real misery is when we don't see you, Krishna. That's the real misery. So again, re-emphasizing the same point that Narada Muni was pointing out to Vyasadeva. Without Krishna, I'm sorry, that's where you're going to have all your problems. Bhishmadeva, another example, he shows that I can be like completely nailed. Every single inch of my body is pierced by an arrow, and I'm lying on this bed of arrows. But if I see Krishna, it's all right. So obviously that can't be imitated, but he's showing the highest pinnacle of that. If we're Krishna conscious, then you can be in the most abject misery and it's not a problem. And actually His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami illustrated that as well. He had cancer riddled through all his whole body, and he was quoted as saying, it doesn't get any better than this. He was so blissful because he was Krishna conscious. So he's basically in the same kind of position as Bhishmadev. He was on his own bed of arrows, but he was totally happy. Dhritarashtra in the first canto, he's lost all his 100 sons. He's pretty miserable. Dharma the bull, religion personified, is miserable. Kali Yuga's chopping off all his legs. Arjuna again is miserable. He's beaten by all these little rogue cowherd boys, and all of Krishna's wives are stolen from him. And then, of course, Parikshit Maharaj, massive misery. He's cursed to die in 7 days. So practically throughout the whole of the first canto, we're just hearing about all the miseries of the material world. This is the very foundation of the Bhagavatam, showing us all these miseries. But the glorious thing about the Bhagavatam is it's showing us the solution. It's showing us that ultimately, materially, you can't counteract all these miseries. You have to go to the spiritual platform. And in the purport, Prabhupada saying a so-called happy person has to endure. So even if you are happy, materially speaking, there's still something you've got to endure. There's always something there. For example, you may have everything perfectly, but like in the heavenly planets, their problem there is that envy. There's still envy in the heavenly planets. So even though materially everything may be perfect, it's like Indra's always worried, oh, who's going to try to take me out and take my position? Because envy's there. But Prabhupada gives it for us here in the material world, down here on Bhuloka, not in the heavenly planets. We, of course, may suffer from envy, but Prabhupada gives a very realistic formula to just logically deal with envy immediately. So we may be envious of someone who's more beautiful than us, more wealthy, more aristocratic, is smarter, is more famous, is stronger, has got one of the 6 opulences to a greater degree than we do. But Prabhupada gives a very simple formula to immediately help us feel better if we're suffering from envy. He says, well, okay, there's that rich man that you may be thinking, oh, I don't have as much money as him. But guess what? That rich man, he had to suffer birth. That was not a nice situation for him. He will also get old. He will also get diseases. and he will also die. So don't worry. There's nothing to be envious of. In other words, don't be envious of anyone here in this material world. They're all suffering. It's just like the examples given of the prisoners. They may have gold handcuffs or iron handcuffs, but they're handcuffs. So there's no point being envious of someone who's got gold handcuffs because it's a suffering position. There's no reason to be envious of anyone in this material world because the position isn't a position that is worth envying. The only logical, reasonable envy that we should have is towards Krishna, because he's actually got something worth being envious of. So, of course, we counteract that by serving Krishna and joining him in his pleasure pastimes rather than trying to take his position. But yeah, actually, if there's any envy that's logical, that's actually the only logical envy that we should have. And it's explained that actually that's it. That is why we are envious of other living entities. It's actually envy of Krishna, but in an indirect way, because they've got one of the opulences to a greater extent than we do. But they're just Krishna's given that them to a greater extent than we have, so we're envious of that. But just as it's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, those who are less intelligent worship the demigods to get material benedictions. That's a less intelligent thing to do. So similarly, being envious of people here, that's less intelligent. Better go straight to Krishna, worship him, and get your problem solved. So that's what Bhagavatam's trying to point out. And so I'll just finish on a positive, of course. There's so many negatives in this, but they're all the negatives are ultimately a positive because they're trying to encourage us to become detached from material existence. As I heard it explained by one speaker, I believe it's 5/6. So that's like roughly 80% or a little bit more. My math's not so good, but 5/6 of the Bhagavatam is all about the miseries of the material world. It's all about the material world, detaching us from the material world, instructions for it, helping us become detached. And only 1/6 of the Bhagavatam, so that's less than 20%, that's like 16.6666%, I think, is about the glories of spirit and about Krishna's pastimes and things like that. And I heard explained that the reason it's like that, the reason why there's such a heavy emphasis on the negative and less on the positive, is because we're so attached and we need a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot and more and more and more examples of how this material world is a suffering place and miserable and not worth being attached to help us become detached. Because if we weren't so attached, the Bhagavatam could be 50-50. It could be half all about the glories of Krishna, and we could just spend more time hearing about how wonderful Krishna is and less time about what we're attached to. But that doesn't work because of the level of our conditioning. So that's why there's so much, you could say, negative talk in the Bhagavatam, because we're just so attached. We just don't want to let go of this material world, even though we suffer so much. Even though there's so many problems, we just so stubbornly attached. So actually, we don't need to hear so much wonderful stuff, because if we could just hear one holy name of Krishna, that would give us enough bliss and satisfaction. But we don't want to hear that name. The mind's trying to find so many ways to get out of listening to the Maha Mantra. Often it's explained that I've heard this from many senior Vaishnavas say like this. Often it's not till you get to like 25, 26, 27 rounds where the mind's actually starting to submit to the holy name. So, and that's when, especially 32 rounds, that's often where some say that's where the real chanting begins. And some even say 64. It's not until you get to 64 you finally got rid of all the mess completely that you can really go for it. So yes, the mind is very attached. And that's why we have a daily practice, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Daily we have to hear the Bhagavatam. Daily we have to chant a prescribed number of rounds to help us deal with the stubborn attachment, in the heart. So I just wanted to finish on that positive, which is, yes, Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults. It's explained in the 12th canto. that it's an ocean of faults. Kaliyodosha nadhe rajan asti heko mahad gunaha. But there is one good quality. Kirtanareva Krishnasya. Just by hearing and chanting about Krishna, Mukta Sangha Param Brajit, we can get free from the contaminations of this material world, from our attachments to it. And I just want to complete this class with elaborating on that point just a little bit. His Holiness S.B. Keshav Maharaj, he said, basically you can't fix the faults. There's so many problems in this world, so many issues, this way, that way. Basically, as that verse that I just quoted states, it's an ocean of faults. You can't get to the bottom of it. So S.B. Keshav Maharaj, he was saying that instead of trying to fix the faults so much, because there's just unlimited numbers of them, basically just focus on Krishna and focus on outreach. And that way you can actually become happy because you're focusing on the positive. Otherwise, if you're trying to focus on all the negatives and how to fix each one, there's just too many of them. And you'll get into conflicts with other people. So basically, I also heard my own spiritual master say exactly the same thing in response to someone's question. In one class, he said basically that, yes, you're right. This world's full of faults. You're right, that devotee probably does have a problem. You're right, that health issue in your life probably is causing a major drama. You're right. Your boss at work's probably giving you a hard time and it's unfair. You're right. Basically, you're right. This world is full of faults. Wherever you look, you'll see them. You'll find them everywhere. So don't focus on them. That's why it's explained, just chant Hare Krishna and focus on that, because otherwise you'll just constantly be in anxiety, constantly be disturbed. So the real solution to the material world is not to try to fix it, but just to focus on the positive, which is focus on Krishna and his glories and trying to give Krishna to others. And the ultimate solution will manifest, which will be twofold. One is by focusing on the right thing yourself, you will become peaceful even though you're in the material world. Mam cha yobicharina bhakti yogena sevate. You'll transcend the material modes by focusing on Krishna. And the second thing is that you'll actually get out of here. So if you're not in a horrible place, then you won't notice all the horrible things. If you're back in Goloka Vrindavan having a good time with Krishna and all his associates, then you have no problems. So that's our program. Become Krishna conscious so you can become peaceful here, and then ultimately you'll leave here and go back to the spiritual world. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. Appreciate your time. Is there any quick comments or questions? Maybe we've got a few minutes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much for bringing out the essential points of this verse very nicely. And it was nicely told that this place, this material world, is not a place of happiness. It's always a place of misery. But the beauty of the Maya is that it deludes people, and they think that it is that by working hard or some way or other, they can make a plan out of it. That is the role of Maya that is keeping us. Most of the people, to say, unless one is in Krishna conscious, he always thinks that he can make the world better in his own way, with the help of people, with the help of friend, or with the government help, or in this another one way or the other. They think that it will, and that is the illusion of Maya. But a really intelligent person who is Krishna consciousness knows that by the words of Krishna, who is the most knowledgeable person. He has told that it is a place of misery. So the intelligent man should make a plan to not to get attached in it, and rather living this. It's a place to prepare ourselves so that we can ultimately go back to Godhead. And it is a place of training in one sense, or for doing our devotional service to the Lord. And in fact, the Lord is, if I can remember, there's a verse in, I think, 7th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, chapter 7 and 7th verse. It says, Jashambhu Sri Omanaya Krishna Parama Purushe Bhakti Rutpadmade Pumsho Shoko Moho Bhayapop. That means when we grow devotional service, or do devotional service to the Lord, that removes the fear of constant problem or the constant misery that we face. shoko, mo, and boy. All these things goes away when we undertake devotional service to the Lord. But for the common man, it is very difficult to understand. So it is the duty of the intelligent person to let them understand that in this material world, it is always full of misery. And the only way is to just to avoid, is to keep it aside and try to focus on the real, which Prabhupada says, is solving the real problem of life to get rid of these miseries. And that is only by doing devotional service to the Lord. So this is my realization. Thank you, Prabhu, for your nice class. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yes, I'm just thinking the verse that you quoted, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's 2 verses after that. Yeah, gives the solution where Vyasadeva gives the bhakti yoga process, because that's the only way to mitigate all the material miseries is by devotional service to the Lord. So, yeah, of course, we have to do everything we can in this material world to try to keep things nice materially, have good relationships, have good diet, have good exercise regime, sleep properly, and like that. But ultimately, no matter how perfect you get it, yeah, we've got to get out of here. So, all right. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time again. Hope you have a wonderful day. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.
Ki jai.
Jai.
Ki jai.
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhyascha
पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः।
Anantakoti
वैष्णववृंद
Vaishnava
की जय।
His Grace Gadai Gauranga Prabhu ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki
की जय।
Gaur
गौर
Premanand
प्रेमानंद
Hare
हरि
Bol.
हरि बोल। हरि